The topic is the MetroHealth system creating sustainable equity for our patients, our employees, and our community. Alan, I believe we need to just unmute. If you could unmute your microphone.
Okay, thank
I
you very
hear
much.
you.
I appreciate it. It's truly a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today. Um, at the MetroHealth system, we are indeed on a journey, and I'd just like to spend a few moments taking you on that journey. If we think about everything that transpired over the course of 2020, we were in what I feel are we were in the midst of two pandemics. The pandemic known as COVID-19 and the pandemic known as systemic racism and bias, along with social injustice, not only in this country, but also globally. So with these two pandemics, we felt the need to really enhance our efforts. And really, in many instances, both of these pandemics overlap one another. There's a lot of integration points. So wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing within MetroHealth. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and take you on that journey. So hopefully everyone can see those slides. If I can get a thumbs up, Charlene, please come off of your camera so I can
Yeah, I
make
can
sure
see
you
the
see it.
slides and they
Okay.
look like they're in presentation mode as well. So thank you,
Okay.
Alan.
We just want to make sure that we don't have any technology glitches. So again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. So at the MetroHealth system, we're focused on creating sustainable equity for not only our patients and our employees, but also our community. That's been our focus for over 183 years. We are a safety net hospital really focused on serving the underserved. We look for those gaps and we fill those gaps for our patient population. From a patient demographics perspective, close to 80% of our patients are either on Medicare, Medicaid, or underinsured, many of whom have no insurance. So that being said, we still realize that our patients have choice. There are other healthcare institutions in Greater Cleveland that they can go to. And they also have the choice to not get any healthcare coverage, not have anyone take care of their healthcare needs. So we're not in the business of just practicing medicine. We look at each one of our patients from a mind, body, and spirit perspective because we realize that all three of those are critically important to being healthy and staying healthy. A little bit about my story. I'm born and raised in Greater Cleveland. I've worked across a number of industries. And in fact, I think that gives me somewhat of an advantage, having worked across a multitude of industries in a role like this. When you think about diversity, inclusion, equity, human resources, all of those things actually come together because the focus is on creating an environment where every employee can be at their best. More often than not, you spend more time at work than you do with your friends, family, and loved ones. So it's imperative for us to create a culture within the MetroHealth system, not only at our main campus where I'm physically located, but across our entire ambulatory network, as well as our other hospitals that are within this region, where every employee can be at their best on a daily basis. When we define inclusion, diversity, and equity, our definitions may be a little bit different from others, but ultimately, in my opinion, doesn't matter how diverse we are on this call. I'm not quite sure how many participants we have, but I'm sure this is a very diverse group. But if we don't leverage that diversity to ensure successful business outcomes, and in my world, that successful patient outcomes, then the diversity really doesn't matter, quite frankly. So it's imperative that we have an inclusive culture first. And if you have a truly inclusive culture, you will attract every aspect of diversity. And on this particular slide, you'll notice that there are multiple characteristics of diversity. The wheel that we use contains a little over 40 different characteristics, and every characteristic is equally important. Now, from a US perspective, we tend to focus on what you see in the internal dimension, because there are laws, there are rules, there are regulations associated with many of those internal dimensions because of a history of discrimination and bias based on sex, based on race, based on gender, age, etc. However, when we think about diversity in its fullest, we realize that each and every one of those characteristics is equally important. When we talk about equity, which is somewhat new to the role of an inclusion and diversity practitioner, it's really looking at fair treatment for all. I'm sure most of you have seen the graphic image of three people who are all different heights, different stature, all standing on a box that is the same size. And they're all trying to look over a fence at a baseball game being played. If you haven't seen that, Google equity images and you'll see that. But because those folks are all different heights, different stature, everybody doesn't get a full view of the entire field. The tallest person is able to see the entire field. However, the shortest person is just barely looking over the fence. When we think about equity, equity is a little bit different. Equity is ensuring that everyone has the full view of that baseball field, which means that the box may need to be a little bit taller for those shorter individuals and perhaps a little bit shorter for the taller folks. So everybody has a full view of the field. What we're trying to do within the MetroHealth system is build sustained equity or sustainable equity. What we're doing from an inclusion, diversity, and equity perspective should outlive me. It should outlive all of us within this system. Like I earlier said, we've been around 183 years. What we're building right now, in terms of the very fiber, the very fabric of our organization, should last us another 180 plus years. So how are we dealing with this in the midst of two pandemics? Obviously, we've got the pandemic known as COVID-19. It's required all of us to walk around with a mask. And I encourage all of you to continue wearing your mask, because we've seen, being in healthcare, we've seen far too many folks lose friends, family, and loved ones to this devastating illness. In fact, it's touched members of my own team. So I've seen them go through the pain and the suffering associated with that. This is a very real disease. It's also one that disproportionately impacts people of color. There are a lot of instances where, when we think about the population that we serve within the MetroHealth system, I mentioned earlier, we take care of folks who are on Medicaid, Medicare, many people who are underinsured or have no insurance. We take care of the underserved, the folks who don't have a voice, who are often forgotten. Those folks have had a disproportionate impact on them because of this threatening disease. And then at the time of the murder of George Floyd, which was really, I think, the culmination of things that had happened truly over a 400 plus year period in this country, not only Americans, but also people across the globe said enough is enough. No longer are we going to stand on the sidelines and watch perhaps our neighbor mistreat others, allow their biases to come into the workplace. It's time for everybody to speak up, to have that leadership courage, because everybody's a leader. You don't have to have a title, an official title to be a leader. Everyone on this call is a leader within their family, within their network of friends. And right now, we're calling on everyone to get that leadership courage to speak out around racism and social injustice. Within the MetroHealth system, we have a series of goals that we truly believe, in order to hold ourselves accountable, we have to be very transparent with our goals. So you see them on this slide. Our goals are visible not only to our employees within MetroHealth, but also externally. You can find these goals listed on metrohealth.org. We feel that in order to hold ourselves accountable, the community needs to hold us accountable as well. So as we progress according to these goals, against these goals, we will report that out, not only internally, but externally. That shows that we're walking the talk. Right after the murder of George Floyd, nearly every organization, large and small, had something to say. They wrote some type of manifesto or some type of statement really decrying what had happened to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless others. However, are they all walking the talk? That's why we wanted to make sure that we took a very, very different, very intentional approach around addressing racial inequity and inclusion. In order to do that, we focused on 4 different pillars within our organization. The patient experience. I mentioned earlier, we realize that our patients have choice. They can choose to go to another healthcare institution, or they can choose not to receive any healthcare at all. How we treat them, how we make them feel, how we value them, how we respect them translates immediately into their perceived quality of care. What we found out through some analysis last year was that many of our patients of color felt that their quality, the quality of their experience, differed greatly from the majority population. We saw disparities in terms of perceived quality of care across our Medicare patients, as well as our patients who have private or commercial insurance. Now, the next piece of that is to understand the why and the what can we do to change that. From a culture and values perspective, at MetroHealth, we have what's known as the STAR IQ values. That's the acronym for our values. First value, the S in STAR IQ, is for service to others. That's what we're here for. T is for teamwork, A is for accountability, R is for respect. And disrespect will not be tolerated. I don't think anybody on this call wakes up in the morning and says, I see Ashley's face, so I'm gonna pick on you, Ashley. I don't think anybody wakes up and says, what can I do to make Ashley's life miserable? But there may be things that I do or say, more often than not, subconsciously rather than consciously, that prevent Ashley from being at her best. The MetroHealth system is filled with good people who do great work. We're heavily engaged in our community. I'm going to share some of those things that we do from a community perspective in just a minute. But we realize that sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we don't do or say the right thing. We're trying to raise that level of consciousness so that instead we hit the pause button before we allow our biases to come out, to impact that patient experience and that employee experience. The I stands for inclusion, diversity, and equity. And lastly, Q, quest for excellence. We know that we do a pretty good job. Honestly, we do a really good job in terms of inclusion, diversity, and equity across our system, but we strive to get better. Our goal is to be the most admired public health system in the nation. And with many of our programs, some might argue that we're already there. But we continuously strive to get better, and that's what we're doing in this space. We're holding ourselves accountable and not being comfortable with the status quo. From an HR systems, policies, and processes perspective, we're looking at all of our policies. Last year, we had about 90 HR policies. We've since skinnied them down to roughly around 60. But we realized that during that time period where we skinnied those policies down, reduced them by 30 policies, at no point in time did we look at those with a fine-tooth comb to determine, do any of these policies create micro advantages for some of our employees and micro inequities for others? This year, we've been looking, and actually last year in 2020, we began looking at those policies in further detail to understand if we do have those micro inequities or micro advantages, and taking very deliberate steps to eliminate those micro inequities. Same thing from a process perspective, our hiring processes, our interviewing. Are we truly fishing the entire pond for talent? Are we doing what's taking the easy road, doing what's most comfortable to us. In fact, even when we look at our job descriptions, are we creating micro inequities for folks based on educational background? Are we rating or evaluating potential candidates based on education, even though another candidate may have 10, 15, 20 years of practical management experience? But are we overvaluing that degree and creating a micro inequity? Also, looking at the employee experience, we realize that across our vast network of ambulatory sites, clinics, express care clinics, and hospitals, it's very important to have a similar experience for all of our employees. Because I sit at the main campus, it shouldn't feel any different for me, for my experience as an employee, than it does for someone at one of our ambulatory sites. So culture plays an important role. And I'll show you what we've done in terms of the employee experience to get the data that we need to truly make a difference. Our process is engaging and assessing the current environment, then building capabilities, accountabilities, and metrics that you can truly measure. This is not about what feels good, what looks good, or what feels good. We have to be able to measure our progress because if you recall, as I mentioned in our STAR IQ values, that Q is quest for excellence. Again, we cannot be satisfied with the status quo. The quote that you see at the bottom of the screen is from our president and CEO, Dr. Akram Boutros. And I think it's so appropriate when we look at building sustainable equity. We must be embracing to all patients, all employees, and our community. We must treat all, we must employ all, and we must see value in all. That's how we're successful. In the midst of these two pandemics, we focused on our patients, our employees, and our community. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor around what we are purposefully doing. We realize that with COVID-19, there's a lot of information out there. You can peruse the internet. Some of the information is true and factual, other is not. So we established a COVID-19 hotline immediately when the virus came into play within the United States to address questions that people have. We've conducted that patient satisfaction data analysis to really understand the what from a race, equity, and inclusion perspective. Now we're conducting patient focus groups to understand the why and the how being how can we address those perceptions. We've purposefully met with our patients where they are, meeting them where they are to ensure that they have access to testing and vaccinations. From an employee perspective, we launched a wonderful series entitled Healing Begins with Listening. And I'd like to share one of those videos with you right now. Does everyone see the video?
I can see the video, Alan. Yep.
Okay. One thing I need to do is make sure that you will be able to hear it. So let me bring
And if you could make sure it's full screen too, Alan.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we see it as full screen?
Yes.
Okay. This is one of our videos. This is the video series that we created to really share the pain associated with systemic racism and bias.
My name is Dwight Lee. I work at NAVS, Environmental Services. I'm also a volunteer. I volunteer for the NODA program, which is No One Dies Alone. I worked 8 hours here at Metro, and before I could get home, I got a call asking if I could sit with a patient because the family had been there for like 72 hours. They just wanted to go home and freshen up and come back. I got up to the floor, and I met the nurse at the station, and she was giving me some insight on the patient and the family. So when we got to the door, I got halfway in, and one of the family members pulled the nurse aside, and she came back. She was so apologetic. She was walking me back to the elevator. She said, "I'm so sorry about this." And she pretty much told me, but not just flat out, that they didn't want you because of the color of your skin. And that just kind of like tore my heart apart. I mean, I'm giving up my time. I'm giving up, just wanting to make sure that this person doesn't die alone. But they just didn't want me.
Okay. That is just one example of the types of videos that we have been doing across the MetroHealth system. Um, Obviously impactful. It's pretty obvious that you can see the pain and the heartache associated with really trying to be a blessing of sorts to a patient, but simply because of how that person looked, the way they presented themselves, they were rejected. What I'd like to share with you now is the next phase of those videos. So if you go out to metrohealth.org, you can see actually all of these videos. But we started out with sharing the pain and heartache associated with systemic racism and bias. And then we pivoted to really begin to share what are some of the desired behaviors. How do we want people to interact with one another as it relates to inclusion, diversity, and equity? So I'm going to share that with you right now.
I'm Mary Massey Story. I'm a family medicine physician, and I work in the express care clinics of MetroHealth. I'm from inner city Pittsburgh, and inner city Pittsburgh for me is the projects of Pittsburgh. If I were to start with the earliest help, I would say middle school. I had great teachers and coaches who breathed life into me. So Coach Rookie stood maybe 5 feet tall. She's a Polish woman with curly hair who is a bundle of energy. She was the energy that we needed, and she was the light that we needed. She was that flame. When you grow up and things are segregated and you can't see hope, if you have someone who breathes hope into you, that's opportunity. And when you have opportunities, you have visions, you have dreams. People stop dreaming when they don't see anything but despair. And she gave me a chance to see so much more than that. Where would I be without Coach Rookie? I would hate to think. I'm so sorry. I wouldn't be a physician. I wouldn't have been the athlete. I wouldn't have been the student. I wouldn't have been the fighter. To be honest, I wouldn't have believed in people who didn't look like me if it wasn't for her. She's my everything. She's my family.
So again, as you can see, we've taken an approach where we want to educate you from a head, heart, hands approach. Obviously, these two videos are really focused on your heart, touching your heart, and really showing you what are the desired behaviors that we're looking for in terms of inclusion, diversity, and equity. So with that, let's make sure that everyone can see these slides. Can someone just shout out that they can see my slides? I want to make sure I switch back.
Yeah, the slides are set, Alan.
Okay. All right, very good. So part of this head, heart, hands approach involves intrinsic inclusion, which is an educational platform that we've adopted within the MetroHealth system that really focuses on first learning how to become an empathetic listener. These stories that you just saw, the videos, that's the beginning of that in terms of the healing that's required. So we've done a lot of work. Our senior most leaders, as well as our system board and our foundation board members, have all begun their educational journey. Right now, concurrent with this keynote address, a number of our directors and managers are going through their educational experience. Our goal is within the next 12 months, every employee across the MetroHealth system, of which there are roughly 8,000, will have been touched in some way, shape, or form from an education perspective. We also recently launched a Why I'm Getting the Vaccine video series, which is focused on providing fact-based information for those folks who are deciding whether they are going to get the COVID-19 vaccine or not. I'm not going to pressure you or judge you if you choose not to get the vaccine, but I think it's critically important for you to be equipped with all of the facts to then make a conscious decision. We've conducted over 60 employee and provider focus groups, really focusing on systemic racism and bias, and what are the perceptions, what are the feelings, what are the experiences of our employees within MetroHealth. It's imperative that we create an open, safe environment, a physically and psychologically safe environment to engage in dialogue. During the pandemic, we did a couple things in terms of ensuring that our folks were financially stable. We increased our minimum wage to $15 an hour, and we gave pay increases to over 4,000 of our non-bargaining unit employees. Our bargaining unit employees had already negotiated a raise based on their contract, but we had over 4,000 employees who, in the midst of a pandemic, were not guaranteed to get a pay increase. Many of those employees have spouses, significant others, other family members who lost their jobs or were furloughed during COVID, many of whom are still furloughed. We realized how important it was to give those pay increases regardless, because our folks are out on the front lines really trying to protect everybody on this call. We expanded our tuition reimbursement program to address the nationwide nursing shortage. From a community perspective, two things I really want to touch on here. We have a partnership with a local community college to create opportunities for members of this community, as well as employees at MetroHealth, to raise their economic viability, to compete for higher paying jobs. And that's through our Tri-C MetroHealth Job Access Center. We have free courses on digital literacy, a workforce success seminar, IT classes through Google, a STNA program to become a nursing assistant. Those are free programs available to not only our employees, but citizens of the community so that they can compete for jobs and be successful competing for those jobs. We also engaged some trusted local faith-based leaders to encourage others to get vaccinated and reduce the spread of this deadly disease. We realize that in communities of color in particular, the church has always been a safe haven, and the church has a degree of influence within those communities. So we leveraged our relationships with those faith-based leaders. I know I'm coming up on it, so just wanted to share what I consider to be one of the crown jewels of what we do within the MetroHealth system. We are the only hospital in the United States that has a STEM high school located in the hospital, physically located in the hospital. It is a STEM school. It's a partnership with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. We launched this school back in 2016. We've since had 2 graduating classes. 87% of our students are students of color, representing 9 countries and 7 languages. Many of these students function as heads of household for their families. Many of them are the only English-speaking members of the family, so they're the ones answering the phone, paying the bills, those things. Imagine if you're 15 or 16 years old and you're operating as a head of household. Many of our students work full-time jobs and go to school. You can see a number of our students are differently able, but we had a 93% graduation rate for the class of 2020. We had a 99% graduation rate for the class of 2019. And 100% of our graduating seniors were accepted into 2-year or 4-year colleges. This is for a metropolitan school district in a major US city. That is indicative of our commitment, again, to our patients, our employees, and our community. You can see the core objectives regarding this partnership, and we truly feel this is a crown jewel in terms of the things that we do within MetroHealth. With that being said, I wanted to open it up for questions. I thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you. And this is just a sampling of the things that we do. I encourage you to check out our website, metrohealth.org. We're doing a lot of things in terms of healthcare. We have a very intensified focus on mental and behavioral health and addiction, because we understand that our role is to ensure that you're healthier, not just treat you when you're sick, but to help make you healthy. Thank you.
Hi, Alan. Just unmuting myself over here. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm sure there were a couple of moments there where there wasn't a dry eye in the house, for lack of a better phrase. And we really, thank you for sharing those very emotional videos that really get us to think, right, and really spark that emotional reaction that can have a chain reaction to some real change. So we are out of time for questions, but I would love to just reassure everyone in the audience that that we'll get questions directly to you, Alan. And then also, if you guys go to the lounge, you can contact our speakers today and send individual messages to them, and they'll go straight to you, Alan, so that you'll have all of that. So thank you again, Alan. With that, I wish you well and say thank you. And I'll have to wave goodbye before I go on to my next announcements.
Thank you.